The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. Book the second of the Ascent of Mount Carmel, wherein is treated the proximate means of ascending to union with God, which is faith, and wherein, therefore, is described the second part of this night, which, as we said, belongs to the Spirit, and is contained in the second stanza, which is as follows. Chapter 1, the second stanza. In darkness and secure, by the secret ladder disguised, O happy chance, in darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. In this second stanza, the soul sings of the happy chance which it experienced in stripping the spirit of all spiritual imperfections and desires for the possession of spiritual things. This was a much greater happiness, too, by reason of the greater difficulty that there is in putting to rest this house of the spiritual part, and of being able to enter this interior darkness, which is spiritual detachment from all things, whether sensual or spiritual, and leaning on pure faith alone, and an ascent thereby to God. The soul here calls this a ladder and secret, because all the rungs and parts of the ascent are secret and hidden from all sense and understanding. And thus the soul has remained in darkness as to all light of sense and understanding, going forth beyond all limits of nature and reason, in order to ascend by this divine ladder of faith, which attains and penetrates even to the heights of God. The soul says that it was traveling disguised, because the garments and vesture which it wears and its natural condition are changed into the divine as it ascends by faith. And it was because of this disguise that it was not recognized or impeded, either by time or by reason or by the devil. For none of these things can harm one that journeys in faith. And not only so, but the soul travels in such wise, concealed and hidden, and is so far from all the deceits of the devil, that in truth it journeys, as it also says here, in darkness and in concealment. That is to say, hidden from the devil, to whom the light of faith is more than darkness. And thus the soul that journeys through this night, we may say, journeys in concealment and in hiding from the devil, as will be more clearly seen hereafter. Wherefore the soul says that it went forth in darkness and secure. For one that has such happiness as to be able to journey through the darkness of faith, taking faith for his guide, like to one who is blind, and leaving behind all natural imaginings and spiritual reasonings, journeys very securely, as we have said. And so the soul says furthermore that it went forth through this spiritual night, its house being now at rest. That is to say, its spiritual and rational parts. When therefore the soul attains to union which is of God, its natural faculties are at rest, as are likewise its impulses and yearnings of the senses in its spiritual part. For this cause the soul says not here that it went forth with yearnings, as in the first night of sense, for in order to journey in the night of sense, and to strip itself of that which is of sense, it needed yearnings of sense-love, so that it might go forth perfectly. But in order to put to rest the house of its spirit, it needs no more than denial of all faculties and pleasures and desires of the spirit, in pure faith. Thus, this attained, the soul is united with the beloved in a union of simplicity and purity and love and similitude. And it must be remembered that the first stanza, speaking of the sensual part, says that the soul went forth upon a dark night. And here, speaking of the spiritual part, it says that it went forth in darkness. For the darkness of the spiritual part is by far the greater, even as darkness is a greater obscurity than that of night. For however dark a night may be, something can always be seen. But in true darkness, nothing can be seen. And thus in the night of sense there still remains some light, for the understanding and reason remain, and are not blinded. But this spiritual night, which is faith, deprives the soul of everything, both as to understanding and as to sense. And for this cause the soul, in this night, says that it was journeying in darkness and secure, which it said not in the other. For the less the soul works with its own ability, the more securely it journeys, because it journeys more in faith. And this will be expounded at length in the course of this second book, wherein it will be necessary for the devout reader to proceed attentively, because there will be said herein things of great importance to the person that is truly spiritual. And although they are somewhat obscure, some of them will pave the way to others, so that I believe they will all be quite clearly understood. Chapter 2, which begins to treat of the second part or cause of this night, which is faith, proves by two arguments how it is darker than the first and than the third. We now go on to treat of the second part of this night, which is faith. This is the wondrous means which, as we said, leads to the goal, which is God, who, as we said, is also to the soul, naturally, the third cause or part of this night. For faith, which is the means, is compared with midnight, and thus we may say that it is darker for the soul either than the first part, or, in a way, than the third. For the first part, which is that of sense, is compared to the beginning of night, or the time when sensible objects can no longer be seen, and thus it is not so far removed from light as is midnight. The third part, which is the period preceding the dawn, is quite close to the light of day, and it too, therefore, is not so dark as midnight, for it is now close to the enlightenment and illumination of the light of day, which is compared with God. For although it is true, if we speak after a natural manner, that God is as dark a night to the soul as is faith, still, when these three parts of the night are over, which are naturally night to the soul, God begins to illumine the soul by supernatural means with the ray of his divine light, which is the beginning of the perfect union which follows when the third night is past, and it can thus be said to be less dark. It is likewise darker than the first night, for this belongs to the lower part of man, which is the sensual part, and consequently the more exterior. And this second part, which is of faith, belongs to the higher part of man, which is the rational part, and in consequence more interior and more obscure, since it deprives it of the light of reason, or, to speak more clearly, blinds it, and thus it is aptly compared to midnight, which is the depths of night, and the darkest part thereof. We have now to prove how this second part, which is faith, is night to the spirit, even as the first part is night to sense. And we shall then also describe the things that are contrary to it, and how the soul must prepare itself actively to enter it. For concerning the passive part, which is that which God works in it, when he brings it into that night, we shall speak in its place, which I intend shall be in the third book. End of chapter 2.